Two thugs get on a bus and walk up to an elderly black man, bully him with hurling verbal insults at him and ordering him give up his seat.
Old fucker! You deaf?
However, the old man doesn't back down. Instead, he slaps one of the thugs. This enrages the two, who then try to attack him, but a bearded man steps in to stop them and scolds them for their behavior. Afterward, the man sits in the front seat, and his words infuriate the thugs even more. They believe he is older and weaker, provoking him to a fight.
Stand up, asshole!
But to their surprise, the man knocks them down with just a few punches. A passenger records the incident and uploads it online, drawing widespread attention. In no time, the man becomes famous, turning into an internet star. His image is spray-painted on walls, and whenever he goes out, strangers on the street chase after him. The man's name is Frank, a Vietnam War veteran. Frank couldn't have imagined any of this happening. In fact, he doesn't even know what the internet is until recently. That's because after returning from the Vietnam War, Frank's life has virtually come to a standstill for decades. But soon, everything is about to change dramatically. Frank grows up in a very ordinary family and spends his childhood helping his parents on a farm in California. But the humble life never gets him down. On the contrary, he learns to enjoy the simple things in life, like his relationship with his girlfriend Lindsay, whom he dreams of marrying. But the young couple's plans are interrupted by the Vietnam War. Frank promises he will return from the war as quickly as possible, but this war lasts much longer than expected. He ends up spending 7 years in that foreign land, one of which is as a prisoner of war. He is tortured and interrogated, but somehow he manages to survive and be released. Soon after, Frank is forced to return home due to injuries. After being discharged from the hospital, he rushes straight to his girlfriend's house, only to be met with a huge shock.
Mommy, can you make us once?
Frank realizes that since he can't expect much happiness in his personal life in the short term, he can at least build a career. Initially, he applies to the police academy, hoping his combat experience will earn him a spot, but he is rejected due to his severe injuries. So, he keeps going to interviews, but due to his lack of higher education, he is turned down again and again.
I have just been informed the position was filled.
In the end, poor Frank has no choice but to rely on himself. Unknowingly, he ends up selling hot dogs on the streets. 40 years pass, but one day, everything changes. That day, Frank is riding his usual bus route when two skinheads board the vehicle and begin harassing a black passenger. The skinheads are about to beat the old man when Frank steps in. At first, he just wants to scare the guys off, saying he won't fight them, but they seem to be begging for a beating. The passengers on the bus applaud Frank. What he doesn't know is that someone has already recorded the whole scene with a camera. The video goes viral online, and Frank becomes affectionately known as the Badass. His face is painted on walls and t-shirts. Cops give Frank a ride home like he's their best friend, and reporters compete for an interview with the viral internet star. Most importantly, his mother is incredibly proud of him. But this excitement doesn't last long. Shortly after, Frank's mother passes away, leaving him a large house and her beloved dog as an inheritance. Now, Frank has only one loved one left in his life: his best friend, Klondike, who is also a veteran. Klondike helps Frank settle into his new home. They reminisce about their military past, and Klondike tearfully thanks Frank for taking care of him and let him move in.
Thank you, man.
You ambassador of the only family I got. You saved my life. I owe you.
The two of them dream that their lives will finally take a turn for the better, especially since Frank has suddenly become a local celebrity. Klondike then asks Frank to put a mysterious flash drive in his safe, a device that old-fashioned Frank sees for the first time, and heads off to buy cigarettes. As Klondike leaves the store, he encounters two thugs in a car. They demand the flash drive, and when Klondike pretends not to know what they are talking about, they put a gun to his head. Klondike manages to knock the attackers to the ground and is about to walk away when... Later, Frank is called to identify the body. He pleads with the cops to do everything they can to catch his best friend's killers, and then steps outside for a drink. There, Frank meets his neighbor, who expresses sympathy for his loss and reveals that her brother was recently murdered in almost the same spot as Klondike. The woman complains that the local police do nothing to solve crimes like these. Later, Frank shares this with his cop acquaintance, who promises that the police will do everything they can.
They're working on it.
However, Frank later watches the news and sees that a young white boy was recently murdered in town, and the suspect was apprehended immediately. The next day, Frank goes to the police station and voices his frustration at the lack of progress in Klondike's case. Once again, he's told that the officers are supposedly working around the clock.
We're doing the best we can, Mr. Vega.
Finally, Frank realizes he can't rely on the police. Determined, he heads to the crime scene himself. There, he finds 3 pieces of evidence: a spent bullet casing, a chain, and a necklace with a girl's picture. Afterward, Frank goes to the town's only gun shop, wanting to know what type of gun fired the bullets. The local advisor tells him that these rounds are only used in specific weapons for the military and secret agents, and that he doesn't have any in stock. However, the salesman recognizes the girl from the necklace Frank found and mentions that she is the wife of a man named Terrence, who lives just a few blocks away. The advisor gives Frank directions to Terrence's house. A tired-looking young woman with a baby opens the door. From their conversation, Frank learns that Terrence hasn't been home to care for his wife and 3 kids in a long time, and she hasn't seen him for weeks.
He's got kids crying for his daddy, and he's playing basketball.
Finally, the woman mentions that one of her friends recently spotted Terrence at the basketball court and suggests Frank go talk to him. Frank heads to the basketball court and asks the locals where he can find Terrence. They refuse to tell him anything. That's when the iconic badass fists come into play. After, their tone changes. They reveal the location of someone named Ronaldo, who might have some information at a nearby address. Frank finds a stranger in a priest's outfit. It turns out that Ronaldo's neighbor has mistaken Frank for a thief. After learning the truth, the neighbor tells Frank of which bar Ronaldo visits every morning. Later that night, Frank witnesses an unpleasant scene. His neighbor, a young couple, arguing loudly at their doorstep. The man storms off, leaving his wife, Amber, and their son, Martin, alone. Frank invites the woman to his place to tend to the wounds her violent spouse has left on her face. The 3 of them have a great conversation and enjoy the evening together. The next morning, Frank tracks Ronaldo down at the bar. People on the first floor recognize him and make it clear they're not happy to see him. Frank, once again, has to show off his fighting skills, eventually making his way to the second floor where Ronaldo is. When asked about Terrence, Ronaldo quickly pulls out a knife and says he won't tell Frank anything. But once Frank dangles Ronaldo's head out the window, he quickly gives in. Ronaldo reveals that Terrence has been seeing a girl who works at a nearby massage parlor. Satisfied with the information, Frank heads home. However, he is stopped by his police friends. They tell him that rumors about Frank's adventures have spread throughout the city. More importantly, the chief of police nearly issued an arrest warrant for him, but the officers stopped him at the last moment. Frank simply responds that he can't stand by and watch while his colleagues remain indifferent to the death of his best friend. The officer responds, saying this isn't Frank's job, and if he keeps going, he won't help him anymore. Frank replies as he walks into his house,
I don't want your help.
only to find that everything inside has been trashed. Before he can take a good look around, a tall man grabs him from behind. The stranger demands that he hand over the flash drive immediately, but Frank pretends not to know what he's talking about and throws the intruder out the window. Next, Frank goes to see his neighbor Martin and asks to check the contents of the flash drive that Klondike gave him. It contains a town map, some building permits, and a list of contacts. Frank can't figure out how his friend is involved in all this, but he does remember that strange nickname, Black Panther. Later, Frank goes to the Asian massage parlor that Ronaldo mentioned and books an appointment with Tatiana. She wants to know why he asked to meet her, and Frank explains that he's looking for Terrence. The girl is terrified. After Tatiana finishes her shift, Frank follows her straight to her house, but the moment he tries to climb in through the window, the neighbor spots him. The neighbor doesn't believe Frank's story about being Tatiana's boyfriend and demands that he come closer. After recognizing Frank as the badass from TV, the neighbor's attitude changes instantly.
I'm a huge fan.
Not only does he let Frank go, but he also reminds him that Tatiana hasn't actually locked the back door. Frank makes his way to the second floor, where he catches Tatiana and Terrence lying on the bed. Terrence tries to shoot at Frank, but Frank quickly pins him down and drags him into the kitchen. There, Frank shoves Terrence's hand into the garbage disposal, demanding to know who killed Klondike and why. Terrence screams in pain and soon surrenders. He reveals that Klondike was killed by his partner, Sebastian, and that they were only following initial orders. Terrence refuses to disclose who gave the orders, but after another round of torture with the disposal, he finally gives up the name and location of the Panther. Back at home, Frank notices that the couple next door is arguing again. Only this time, the man is more aggressive than before. Frank intervenes, telling him to leave Amber alone. When the husband begins accusing his wife of cheating with the neighbor,
Are you fucking this old man?
Frank swiftly twists his arm and sends him packing. Grateful, Amber hugs Frank and tells him he looks exhausted. She suggests he take a nap and then come over for dinner, especially since her son Martin is spending the night at a friend's house, and Frank certainly doesn't have time to rest. He's excited and spends a long time getting ready for dinner, dressing in his best suit, and even buying flowers.
Wow.
Amber is charmed by his new look, and they enjoy a lavish dinner in a fragrant garden. Frank is pleased with the homemade food, and Amber says she's glad to finally cook for someone who appreciates it. She admits to Frank that when she got married, her husband was a very different person, but now he has changed forever. Later, they sit on the terrace chatting, but just as the long-awaited moment for a kiss arrives, it turns out that Martin's friend is grounded and the sleepover is canceled. However, neither Frank nor Amber are discouraged. The three of them spend a wonderful evening together, and at the end of the night, Frank suggests they stay at his place since their front door is broken. The big day for the badass finally arrives. First, he meets with his police friend to hand over the flash drive. He mentions that the information on it led to Klondike's death and asks his friend to take care of his dog if anything happens to him. Then, Frank heads to the church to confess to a priest, as he is about to commit a serious crime.
Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned.
That evening, Frank goes to the warehouse that Terrence told him. At first, the thug guards refuse to let him in, but when the leader, Panther, hears a familiar voice, he steps out from the shadows. The thug responds by saying Klondike was punished for stealing something very important to him. He demands the flash drive from Frank, but when Frank pretends not to know anything about it, the criminals tie him up and strap him into an electric chair. But Frank isn't intimidated by torture anymore. He's been through it before. He stays strong and refuses to give anything up.
It's in your ass.
Panther eventually loses patience and orders his men to continue with their work before leaving. The mobsters have somehow guessed that Frank's girlfriend is waiting for him at home, and Panther decides to pay her a visit. What he doesn't know is that Frank already has a plan and a box of matches in his pocket. An explosion echoes, and Frank breaks free from his restraints. He grabs Panther, who no longer has a car, and engages him in a fistfight. Panther manages to injure Frank with a weapon he finds on the floor, then flees, heading not far from the warehouse. Panther hijacks a bus, kicks out the driver, and speeds off. Frank sees this and jumps on another bus, whose driver willingly gives it up after recognizing the badass. Frank catches up to Panther, but the thug manages to slip away again. The criminal taunts Frank, charging directly at him. At the last moment, Frank swerves, and his bus flips over. Panther's vehicle crashes into an oncoming train. Miraculously, both survive. Panther takes off running, with Frank limping after him. Along the way, Frank encounters the skinheads who once made him famous. They hate Frank for turning them into a laughingstock and dream of revenge, even planning to film a new video where they would be the victors. But things don't go their way.
I can't wait to see what this footage looks like.
Meanwhile, Panther is already inside the house, confronting Amber with a knife. However, he doesn't even have time to touch her, as Frank appears at the door and shoves Panther against the wall. The fight spills out into the street, where Frank collapses to the ground. Just as Panther is about to crush him, Amber jumps on Panther's back, buying enough time for Frank to get up. Frank finally defeats Panther, and the neighbors applaud him. Amber asks if she can tend to his wounds, just as he once did for her. The next day, the local TV station airs a story. The badass is back, but this time, he didn't just beat up random skinheads. He also uncovered one of the town's biggest corruption cases, involving Mayor Williams and one of the most dangerous gangs in the country. Frank is awarded honorary police officer status for his heroic deeds, and he, Amber, and Martin now live happily together. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and like this video. Thank you.